Hey guys, me again. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 2, Section 2, which is all about how cells get their energy. So I'm going to try to make this short, sweet, and to the point, and let's get going. Please pause me and write down that heading. Okay, so cells have to have energy in order to live, grow, and reproduce. We've talked about how cells die off from time to time. You fall down and skin your knee, they get old, they quit working. So they have to be able to reproduce. They obviously have to be able to live, and they have to grow from when they first become a cell, they get just a little bit bigger. Pause and write that down for me. So the objectives of this video are I want you to be able to describe how photosynthesis, cellular respiration, and fermentation all work. I also want you to be able to tell me how they relate to each other. Why are photosynthesis and cellular respiration related or connected? Please pause and write that down for me. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. All of the energy that fuels life comes from the sun. Now, you might say, well, Miss Nick, hello, I don't get my energy from the sun. Well, think about it for just a minute. What do you eat? You eat lettuce, and you eat French fries, and you eat hamburger meat, and all of those things get their energy from the sun. The cow that makes the hamburger gets its energy from the grass. The lettuce and the flowers you put on your table, and all of the vegetables that you eat get their energy from the sun as well. So even though you don't get your energy directly from the sun, you get it from the things that get it from the sun. Does that make sense? All right, pause me, write that down. So photosynthesis, this is the process that changes light energy into food for plants. Now you and I, my dog Lily, we can't do that. We have animal cells, so we cannot convert the sun's energy into food for ourselves, but plants can, and that's very important. In just a little bit, you're going to see why that's important. Pause me, write that down. All right, so there's these things inside the chloroplast. Remember when you did those plant cell diagrams, rather, you drew those, you colored in those little chloroplasts. That kind of like solar panels, and inside them is a chemical called chlorophyll. And what the chlorophyll does is it simply absorbs the light energy, and then it takes that light energy, mixes it with carbon dioxide and water, and it creates glucose and oxygen. Okay? That's the process of photosynthesis. Light plus carbon dioxide plus water yields to or makes glucose and oxygen. Pause me, write that down. All right, so glucose is a carbohydrate just like rice or bread or cereal or potatoes that you eat. It can be stored in plants for later use, and just so happens that that's what we use. We take that glucose that they store and we use it to make our energy. So pause me and write that down. Now, you and me and sweet little Lily here, we all get our energy from food. Now, we can't just set our head on a Big Mac and expect to get energy from it, or look at a milkshake and expect to get some energy from it. We actually have to ingest it, break it down, and then our cells break it down even more. Now, if you look down here at my mouse, see my mouse down here? There are two ways that we can do that. We're going to talk about both ways because most of our energy, as a matter of fact, almost all of our energy comes from a process called cellular respiration. And remember, we talked about that in class, how we all knew that we had to have oxygen in order to live, but we didn't really know why we had to have oxygen. Well, that's the reason, because without oxygen, we can't perform cellular respiration, therefore we can't get the fuel. By the way, do you remember what the fuel is called? We'll come back to that. Pause me and write that down, please. All right, so cellular respiration is the process that your cells, my cells, little lily cells, use to make the food that we eat. That make the energy that fuels our cells. Now, cellular respiration is not the same as breathing. They call it cellular respiration because respiration means breathing, which is what gives us the oxygen to perform that function. Okay? So breathing simply supplies the cell with the oxygen that it needs to perform cellular respiration. All right? Pause me and write that down. All right, so how does it work? So we talked about how plant cells take that sunlight and that water and that carbon dioxide and they mix it all together, bada bing, bada boom, chemical reaction, and they get glucose and oxygen. Well, here's the cool thing. If you know how photosynthesis works, you also know how cellular respiration works, because look here, look at my mouse. They are the exact opposite. So what plants produce, glucose and oxygen, is what we need. What we produce, carbon dioxide, water, and energy, is what the plants need. So you see, we can't live without the plants can't live without us. It's a relationship that works hand in hand, okay? So here's how it works. Sugar, the sugars that are in the plants, combine with the oxygen that you breathe, and they produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Now, the energy in our case is in ATP and heat. That's what keeps your cells running. It's also, by the way, what keeps your body at a nice, even 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? Now, you know this, but I'm going to remind you, this obviously occurs in the mitochondria, right? All right, pause me and write that down, please. So we've talked about photosynthesis, we've talked about cellular respiration. Now let's talk about this thing called fermentation. Fermentation, you've all experienced it. Let me give you an example. You're in Coach Shell's PE class, or you're in Coach Tony Azzo's PE class, or maybe Mrs. Nip, or Mr. Bullington. And they ask you to go out and run the mile. Well, about halfway through the mile, your side might start to hurt a little bit, your thighs might start to burn a little bit. That's fermentation. What's happening is your cells are kicking that ATP up so fast to keep you running that they can't keep up with the amount of oxygen you need. So a little bit of fermentation can take place in your muscle cells in order to make that that little bit of ATP that you need just to get you over that little bit of energy slack. Okay? Now, there's a catch to the fermentation. Number one, your body can't do it for very long. Number two, it can't produce very much ATP. So you can't run on fermentation for days and days and days, not even minutes or hours, okay? All right. Second place it can occur is when yeast and sugar combine, and that's when you get things like wine and beer and all those alcoholic beverages. So fermentation in your muscle cells that we're going to be talking about is that burning sensation you get. It's also, by the way, just a little side note, what makes you sore the next day. That lactic acid builds up in your muscles, and that's what gives you that soreness after a good hard workout. Pause me and write that down, please. All right. In your muscles, like my little running man here, in your muscles, fermentation happens when you're using so much energy that your muscles can't keep up. Now, fermentation is a lot of times going to happen in your big muscles, like your thighs, your calves, this muscle that runs along the side of your rib cage, because they use a lot of energy. Glucose that's stored, remember how I said earlier it can either be used or stored? Well, that little bit of stored glucose is burned up when that ATP is made. Okay? Pause me and write that down. Now, in bacteria and yeast, when yeast combines with sugar, it is kind of burnt. Burnt is probably the wrong word. Ate up is probably the better word. And the byproduct are alcohol and carbon dioxide. Now, you'll see my loaf of bread down here. When I mixed yeast and flour and a little bit of sugar and some warm water, that yeast begins to eat up that sugar. And that's what causes those carbon dioxide bubbles, which is what makes your bread rise. It's also what makes, you'll notice those little holes in your bread. That's where those carbon dioxide bubbles were. Okay? Pause me and write that down. So, I know I was fast. You may need to go back and watch it a couple times. I'm sorry if I went too quickly. We talked about photosynthesis, we talked about cellular respiration, and we talked about fermentation. Now, the things I want you to remember. Number one, you can't have one without the other, because what photosynthesis produces, cellular respiration uses. What cellular respiration produces, photosynthesis uses. So remember, the P in photosynthesis will help you remember that is what plant cells use. Cellular respiration is what you and I, and I'm going to bring my little sweet Lily again, you and I and Lily use to make our energy. Now, they're related because you have to have one to make the other. Okay? Without photosynthesis, cellular respiration can't take place, and without cellular respiration, photosynthesis can't take place. So we have to be very, very careful to protect those things that undergo photosynthesis, because they help us. Hope this helps. You can go back and watch it as many times as you want. Hope you have a great day or a great evening. Bye, guys.